This is a special day, April the 1st, because this was the first Cathay flight from Hong Kong to Perth. And the next day, April the 2nd, was the first flight from Perth back up to Hong Kong. And the flights started in Tokyo on a different flight number and ended up in Tokyo. So the first flight was made from Hong Kong via Kuala Lumpur and then Jakarta. And they had a special stamp collection organised for that, and this is the cover. Now, I've been collecting aviation stamps most of my flying life. You know, it's like all kids of our generation, we all did the stamp collecting, but I continued on collecting aviation stamps. So probably about 25 years ago, I found this in a stamp shop in Perth, and I thought, well, I've got to have that. That's the Cathay green, their normal colour before the latest colour scheme. And they made this booklet with 4 first day covers in it. And I was lucky enough to find this one. And they also had a briefing sheet in there for all the passengers to know exactly where they were going, how long it was going to take, and every member of the crew was named. So it's very well documented. First two here is the top one is Tokyo. That was a different flight number, landed in Hong Kong and then continued on in the flight number 771. The registration was VR HGF, and that was Wednesday, April the 1st, 1970. From Perth to Jakarta was 3 hours and 55 minutes, Jakarta to KL 1 hour 28 minutes, and then 3 hours and 4 minutes down to Hong Kong. So the captain for that was Keith Thompson, First Officer Mike Godfrey. Meanwhile, Brian Floyd had been positioned by the airline down here, and so he had a couple of days off and then flew it back to Hong Kong. So there's the Perth Hong Kong flight covers. The top one is the official airline one, and the bottom one is from a collector. The collectors were allowed to make up their own covers, and they were given special treatment. They all got the specially designed Cathay rubber stamp there. You can see the logo, the Delta with the little Swire flag. Swire was the parent company of the airline, of course. Going back from Perth to Hong Kong, there were 2 captains, Norman Marsh, he was in management, Brian Floyd, flight engineer, was Ron Hucksteep, and it's even got a list of all the cabin crew as well. There were 2,000 sets of these produced with 4 envelopes in each one, and the post office authenticated all of them with all these rubber stamps, but I would never part with mine. There's Brian Floyd's name on the passenger advice list, and Cathay 880, Convair 880, and at this stage I'll hand over to Brian Floyd, who knows a lot more about the Convair 80. But it carried 110 passengers, a wingspan of 120 feet, maximum takeoff of 203,000 pounds, 4 General Electric turbojets, and they had a very high cruising speed of Mach 8.9, and I'm told it was a real pilot's aeroplane. And when I joined Cathay, it had gone by then, and I was on the 707, but ever since, people always ask, oh, did you fly the Convair? Because it was a real pilot's aeroplane, and I keep having to say no. So it was a bit disappointing for that. The first flight of the 880 was on January the 27th, 1959, and only 65 of them were built. Primary users were TWA, Delta Airlines, and Japan Airlines. And at this stage I'll hand over to Brian to say a few words, who had quite a few hours on it. Thank you. I was Brian Floyd's first officer on quite a few trips, and I see him here at the Cathay lunch just about every month. We normally have about 10 or 20 there. One time we had Jeffrey Thomas there, so he takes quite an interest in it.
Okay, thanks, Charlie. I, like Charlie, didn't expect to be talking here today, and I've been hijacked into it, but I'll do my best. I joined Cathay Pacific in 1959, and before that I'd been with TAA in Australia, and so it was my first posting overseas, and I flew for some 26 years with Cathay, and then after they ejected me because I got too ancient, I went to Singapore Airlines for a few years, and after they ejected me for the same reason, I went to Air Hong Kong for another few years. And that was about all I could stretch out of it, but I enjoyed it all, and when you enjoy going to work, I think you've got it made. Some people around now I hear on talkback shows on the radio don't like going to work, don't like their job, and it must be absolutely terrible. Something I don't think I could live with, but I enjoyed the flying and the bit leading up to it when I even did an apprenticeship and came out as a licensed aircraft engineer before I started flying, so that was great. Anyway, with Cathay, I went through aeroplanes like the DC-3, DC-4, DC-6, and Lockheed 188, the first Electra, and then TriStar, Lockheed 1011 TriStar, and Boeing 747, and all of those I enjoyed, but and the Convair 880 I forgot to mention. That is the one that probably pilots would say, arguably so, maybe the 747, but the 880 was referred to as the pilot's aeroplane, as the sporting sports car. Some people referred to it as Brian Mercer, who was a management pilot and check training in Cathay Pacific, and unfortunately died a couple of weeks ago. He kept referring to it as the sports car model, and it was too. Very nice to fly, positive. It was like it was on rails. You pointed it somewhere and it went there. It didn't. Wasn't sloppy on the controls like the 707, for instance, which is a disaster. Yeah, in fact, I firmly believe that the 707 would not pass certification if they put it up for certification as a new aeroplane these days. But anyway, the 880 in Cathay Pacific, we bought them. One, first of all, came brand new from Convair factory in Long Beach, and then after that, Cathay bought quite a few second-hand ones. One came from CAT, yep, the airline that originally was the Flying Tiger people. They formed an airline and it was based in Taipei, and they had it painted up in very fancy colours. Interior looked like some sort of a Chinese bordello inside. red furnishings, and it was called the Mandarin Jet, and Cathay bought that, and like all of the others, they converted it to look like a real, the same as the rest of the fleet. We bought a few of them from Viasa in Venezuela, and one from Japan Airlines, as Charlie said, and one from Swissair, yes. Swissair had one on loan for a while they were waiting for their first Convair 990 to be produced. So that I think in all, at the end of, I think we ended up with 980s, but I was converted to it by Norm Marsh, who Charlie mentioned just a while ago. I think he was, at that time, he was the manager of flight operations in Cathay Pacific a real thorough gentleman. Unfortunately, he's passed on now. And I was co-captain with him on the inaugural Cathay Pacific flight from Perth to Hong Kong. And from memory, I was just trying to find in my logbook there, I think it was 16 minutes after 8 in the morning that we taxied out from Perth to Jakarta, and then went on Jakarta to Kuala Lumpur to Hong Kong. The aircraft didn't have the range to do it in one hop or even two hops, and the three fitted in very nicely with the commercial requirements and the operation, the performance of the aircraft. The aeroplane itself had two, I think it was CJ805 General Electric engines, which were a development, a civil development of the engine in the Lockheed F104, and it looked a bit like it too. When it took off, it left clouds and clouds and clouds of black smoke. It was, yeah, you can see some smoke there, but that's on the cruise. On takeoff, particularly at rotation, it was the terrible clouds of black smoke, and people thought, the general public thought it was on fire. But anyway, it was a beautiful aeroplane to fly, and Cathay Pacific had it set up to their requirements, and we all enjoyed flying it. That's about all I've got to say about it, I think. I think my time's up, is it, Brian?
Yeah, just a couple of things to add there. The Cathay did lose two of those 880s. The first one was in 1967 when a nose-wheel tire burst on takeoff. The aircraft went off the runway 13 at Kai Tak and into the harbour, but there was only one fatality. A Chinese lady cracked her skull. Everyone else escaped unscathed. The next one, very sad, was on June the 15th, 1972, when a bomb exploded on board Cathay Pacific Flight 700Z over Vietnam, killing 81 passengers and crew. That was later found to be an insurance crime, and the person was caught. Now, just to finish off, Brian, 46 years ago, you flew the mail from Perth to Hong Kong, and I have one of those letters here, and it's dated 2nd of April 1970, so it's definitely your flight, and from here to Hong Kong with the Australian stamps and the Cathay Pacific logo. So I'd like to present you with this.
Thank you very much, Charlie. Thanks a lot. I'll treasure this.